A skilled black surgeon, moments away from boarding a flight to perform a life-saving operation, is suddenly denied entry. The bustling terminal falls silent as passengers look on in disbelief. Hard to believe, isn't it? Yet, this startling event unfolded, leaving everyone questioning how such a thing could happen. What comes next will completely alter your perspective on the world around you. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're enjoying the content, a thumbs up goes a long way in helping us bring more exciting projects to life. The alarm went off at 5 a.m., and I jumped out of bed with a start. My heart was already racing before I even realized what was happening. It was the day of the emergency surgery in another state, and missing this flight was not an option. As I hurried to get ready, my mind drifted to the patient waiting for me, a 62-year-old man with a rare heart condition that few surgeons in the country had experienced treating. I knew every minute counted. I looked in the mirror and saw a 45-year-old black man with gray temples and tired eyes from sleepless nights. I threw on a pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt. There was no time to worry about appearances today. "Samuel, you're going to be late," I shouted to myself, grabbing my packed bag and rushing to the car. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Wednesday morning. As I drove, I got a call from Dr. Matthews, my colleague at the hospital where I was headed. "Samuel, glad you picked up. We're all anxious for your arrival. Mr. Hamilton is stable, but—" "I understand, Rachel. I'm on my way to the airport now. I'll be there on time." "Don't worry," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I arrived at the airport parking lot with only 40 minutes until boarding. I sprinted through the corridors, dragging my suitcase and bumping into a few distracted passengers. "Excuse me, sorry," I kept repeating as I zigzagged through the crowd. Finally, I reached the check-in counter, out of breath and sweating. The attendant, a middle-aged blonde woman, looked me up and down with a slightly uncomfortable expression. "Good morning, can I help you?" she asked, her tone not quite matching her polite words. "Good morning. Dr. Samuel Richards, Flight 302 to Denver, please. First-class ticket." She typed in some information on her computer, frowning. "Sir, are you sure it's first class?" Confused, I replied, "Yes, absolutely. It's a work trip. The hospital always books first class for medical emergencies." The attendant exchanged a glance with her colleague next to her, who approached. He was a man around 30 with neatly combed brown hair. "Is there a problem, Jane?" he asked. "Tom, can you take a look at this? The gentleman here claims to have a first-class ticket, but—" Tom looked at me, then at the computer screen. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your ID, please." Not understanding the reason for the suspicion but eager to resolve the situation quickly, I handed over my driver's license and hospital ID. Tom examined the documents for what felt like an eternity. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, not just from the heat but from the growing anxiety. "These IDs seem unusual," Tom commented, looking back at Jane. "Look," I said, trying to stay calm, "I'm a cardiac surgeon. I'm on my way to Denver for an emergency surgery. If you could please expedite this process, I would greatly appreciate it." Jane and Tom exchanged skeptical looks. Jane cleared her throat and said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to wait for a moment. I'll call my supervisor." My stomach dropped. The clock on the wall showed only 25 minutes left until boarding. Every second was precious. "Please," I pleaded, "there's no need for that. I can show you my emails, call the hospital, whatever it takes, but I need to get on this flight." At that moment, I noticed some passengers in line behind me starting to get impatient. Some were whispering to each other, while others pulled out their phones, likely to record the scene. A man in a suit right behind me spoke loudly. "What's the holdup? Why is this taking so long?" Tom, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, replied, "Sir, please wait your turn. We're dealing with an identification issue." I felt my face heat up. It was clear what was happening, but I didn't want to believe it. Not in 2023. Not to me. Not when a life was on the line. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice low and controlled. "I know I might not look like what you expect from a first-class passenger or a doctor, but I assure you I am exactly who I say I am. Please check again. Call the hospital if you need to, but I cannot miss this flight." Jane, looking more irritated than sympathetic, responded, "Sir, I'm going to ask you to calm down. Our supervisor is on the way, and we'll sort this out, but if you continue to cause a disturbance, we'll have to call security." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling a mix of anger and despair. How could I explain the urgency of the situation? How could I make them see beyond their prejudices? The supervisor arrived, a middle-aged man with a badge that read Roger. He quickly listened to Jane and Tom's account, then turned to me. "Dr. Richards, is it? Could you please come with me? We'll resolve this in a more private setting." As I followed Roger, I heard murmurs from the line behind me. Some seemed sympathetic, others clearly irritated by the delay I was causing. Little did they know that every minute lost here could cost a life in Denver. Roger led me to a small room at the back of the check-in area. The space was cramped, with just a table and 2 chairs. The white, lifeless walls only added to my sense of claustrophobia. "Dr. Richards, please have a seat," Roger said, gesturing to one of the chairs. His tone was polite, but I could sense the distrust in his eyes. "Look, Roger, I really need to catch this flight. There's a patient waiting for me in Denver for an emergency surgery," I explained, trying to stay calm. Roger looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my casual clothes. "I understand your urgency, sir, but we have protocols to follow. Could you show me your documents again?" I sighed deeply but handed over my hospital ID and driver's license once more. Roger scrutinized them, holding them up to the light as if looking for signs of forgery. "These documents seem unusual," he commented, echoing Tom's earlier words. "They are perfectly legitimate," I responded, frustration growing in my voice. "I can call the hospital right now if you need to confirm my identity." Roger ignored my offer. "Dr. Richards, if that's really your name, understand that we have to be careful. It's not common to see someone with your appearance claiming a first-class ticket and asserting they are a renowned doctor." I felt my blood boil. "My appearance? What exactly do you mean by that, Roger?" He looked uncomfortable for a moment but continued. "Well, your casual attire, your agitated behavior, it's not the typical profile of our first-class passengers. I'm dressed like this because I left home in a rush for a medical emergency," I exclaimed, my voice rising involuntarily. "And as for my agitated behavior, how do you expect me to act when I'm being stopped from doing my job because of prejudice?" Roger raised his hands in a defensive gesture. "Sir, there's no need to get worked up. We're just following standard procedures." At that moment, I heard a commotion outside the room. The door suddenly swung open, and Jane, the check-in attendant, rushed in. "Roger, the situation is getting complicated out there. Some passengers are filming and saying they're going to post it on social media." Roger's face went pale. He turned to me, his expression a mix of concern and irritation. "Dr. Richards, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. We need to resolve this in the presence of our security team." My heart sank. Security? This is ridiculous. I'm the one being discriminated against here. Ignoring my protests, Roger led me out of the room. In the terminal, a small crowd had gathered. Several passengers were pointing their phones in our direction, while others were loudly arguing with the airport staff. A middle-aged woman approached us, her face red with indignation. This is outrageous. You can't treat people like this just because of the color of their skin, she exclaimed. Ma'am, please step back. This is an internal matter, Roger tried to argue, but his voice wavered slightly. I glanced at the clock on the wall. There were only 10 minutes left until boarding. Desperation began to take hold of me. Please, I begged, addressing not just Roger but everyone around, I'm Dr. Samuel Richards. I have an emergency surgery to perform in Denver. A life depends on me. I can't miss this flight. My plea seemed to resonate with some of the onlookers. Murmurs of sympathy began to spread through the crowd. At that moment, 2 burly security guards approached. What's the issue here? Asked the taller one, his deep voice echoing through the now silent terminal. Roger started to explain the situation but was interrupted by a female voice coming from behind the crowd. Wait a minute. I know this man. The crowd parted, revealing a young woman dressed in a nurse's uniform. She quickly approached, her eyes wide with recognition. Dr. Richards? Samuel Richards, she asked, stopping in front of me. I blinked, confused for a moment before recognizing her. Nurse Stevens? She smiled, relieved. Yes, exactly. I can't believe I'm seeing you here. Everyone, this man is exactly who he says he is. He's one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Roger and the security guards exchanged nervous glances. Nurse Stevens turned to the airport staff, her voice filled with indignation. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Dr. Richards has saved countless lives. He gave an incredible lecture at our conference on innovative techniques in cardiac surgery. Roger's face flushed with embarrassment. He turned to me, stammering, Dr. Richards, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I barely heard his apologies. My eyes were fixed on the clock, 5 minutes until boarding. I need to board now, I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for argument. The panic was palpable in the air. Roger, the supervisor, started sweating profusely, his face shifting from red to white in a matter of seconds. He turned to Jane, the attendant, shouting, Print Dr. Richards's boarding pass now. Jane rushed back to the counter, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The crowd around us continued filming, some applauding, others still murmuring in shock. Nurse Stevens held onto my arm. Dr. Richards, I'm so sorry about this. It's unbelievable that things like this still happen. I nodded briefly, my mind focused solely on getting to the plane in time. Thank you for stepping in, Nurse Stevens. You might have saved a life today. Roger returned with my boarding pass in hand, practically pushing me toward the security checkpoint. This way, Dr. Richards. We'll take you directly to the gate. We ran through the airport corridors, Roger shouting for people to move aside. We passed through security in record time, the agents clearly briefed on the emergency situation. We arrived at the gate with just 2 minutes left before the doors closed. The flight attendant saw us approaching and frowned. Sorry, sir, but we're about to close boarding, she said, her hand already on the door control. Roger intervened, panting. Please, this is Dr. Richards. There was a terrible misunderstanding. He needs to be on this flight. The flight attendant looked at me, then at Roger, clearly confused by the situation. I'm not sure if I can. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Dr. Matthews from Denver. I quickly answered, putting it on speaker. Samuel, where are you? The patient is being prepped for surgery, Matthews's anxious voice echoed through the gate area. I'm at the gate now, Rachel. There was an issue, but I'm resolving it, I replied, looking directly into the flight attendant's eyes. Her expression changed instantly. She nodded and opened the door. Go ahead, Dr. Richards. Good luck with the surgery." I ran down the jet bridge, my heart pounding in my chest. As I boarded the plane, I was met with curious looks from the other first-class passengers, probably wondering about the delay. I barely had time to settle in before the plane began to taxi. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my breathing and focus on the task ahead. The 2-hour flight to Denver felt like an eternity. My mind kept replaying the events at the airport, the anger and frustration mixing with the relief of having made the flight. As soon as the plane landed, I called Dr. Matthews again. "Rachel, I just landed. I'm on my way." "Thank God, Samuel. Mr. Hamilton is stable, but we need to start the surgery as soon as possible." "What happened?" I sighed deeply. "It's a long story, Rachel. I'll explain when I get there." A hospital car was waiting for me at the airport. During the ride, I couldn't help but think about how my appearance had almost cost a patient's life. The injustice of the situation consumed me, but I knew I had to focus on the surgery ahead. I arrived at the hospital in record time. The medical team was already prepped, waiting for me in the operating room. As I prepared, Dr. Matthews briefed me on the patient's condition. "Samuel, I'm so glad you're here," she said, the relief evident in her voice. "Mr. Hamilton had a minor complication an hour ago, but we managed to stabilize him. We're ready to start as soon as you give the word." I took a deep breath, letting go of all the tension and frustration from the day. Now, my focus was singular, to save the life in my hands. "Let's begin," I said, stepping into the operating room. The next 6 hours were intense. Mr. Hamilton's condition was even more delicate than we had initially anticipated. There were moments when I thought we might lose him, but the team worked in perfect harmony. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we successfully completed the surgery. Mr. Hamilton's heart was beating strong and steady. I left the operating room exhausted but relieved. Dr. Matthews was waiting for me outside, a tired smile on her face. "You did it, Samuel. It was close, but you saved him." I nodded, feeling the weight of the day finally settle on my shoulders. "It was too close, Rachel. Far too close." Matthews frowned, noticing my tone. "What happened at the airport, Samuel? You seem shaken, and it's not just because of the surgery." I looked at my colleague, hesitant. How could I explain what had happened? How could I make her understand the humiliation and anger I had felt? "Rachel, I began, but was interrupted by the sound of my phone. It was a social media notification. My heart sank as I saw the content. It was a video of the incident at the airport, already with thousands of views and shares. The caption read, "Black doctor prevented from boarding emergency flight. Airport racism exposed, *." My hand trembled as I showed the video to Rachel. Her eyes widened in shock and outrage as she watched the scenes unfold on the small screen. "My God, Samuel," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "This is unbelievable. How did you manage to stay calm enough to perform the surgery after that?" I let out a tired sigh. "I had no choice, Rachel. Mr. Hamilton's life was at stake." At that moment, a nurse appeared in the hallway, her face a mix of concern and excitement. "Dr. Richards, Dr. Matthews, you need to see this. It's all over the news." We followed the nurse to the waiting room, where a small group of hospital staff was gathered in front of the television. On the screen, a news anchor spoke with seriousness. "Shocking footage of an incident at the international airport this afternoon is circulating on social media. The video shows renowned cardiac surgeon Dr. Samuel Richards being prevented from boarding an emergency flight due to what appears to be a case of racial discrimination." I felt my stomach churn as the images from the airport played out on the screen, the outraged crowd, Roger trying to explain, Nurse Stevens coming to my defense. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Dr. Richards was on his way to perform an emergency surgery in Denver, the anchor continued. Sources confirmed that he arrived in time to save the patient's life despite the delay caused by the incident. Rachel placed a hand on my shoulder. Samuel, this is serious. You need to make a statement. I shook my head, feeling suddenly exhausted. Not now, Rachel. I need to check on Mr. Hamilton's recovery. But before we could leave the room, my phone rang again. It was the hospital director, Dr. Laura King. Samuel, she said, her voice a mix of concern and determination, I just saw the news. We need to talk about how to handle this. The press is asking for a statement. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the situation. Laura, I just came out of a 6-hour surgery. I'm not in the right state to talk to the press right now. I understand, Samuel, she replied, her voice softening. But we can't ignore this. It's an opportunity to address a serious issue and make real changes. I took a deep breath, knowing she was right. Okay, Laura. Give me an hour to check on my patient and pull myself together. After that, I'll do the press conference. After hanging up, I went straight to the ICU to check on Mr. Hamilton. He was awake, his eyes slowly opening as I entered the room. Dr. Richards, he murmured, his voice weak but full of gratitude. I heard the nurses talking. Is it true what happened at the airport? I hesitated for a moment but decided to be honest. Yes, Mr. Hamilton, there was a misunderstanding. But the important thing is that we got here in time. He reached out a trembling hand, holding mine. Thank you, Doctor. Not just for saving my life, but for going through all that to get here. I felt a wave of emotion hit me. It's my job, Mr. Hamilton. Rest now. You have a long recovery ahead. I left the room with a renewed sense of purpose. I found Rachel waiting for me in the hallway. Ready? She asked. I nodded. Let's do this. The conference room was packed with journalists and cameras when I entered. Flashbulbs popped, and a murmur of voices filled the air. Dr. King stood by my side, offering silent support. I took a deep breath and approached the microphone. The room fell silent. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice steady despite my exhaustion. My name is Dr. Samuel Richards. Today, I faced a situation that no professional, no human being, should ever have to face. I was judged not by my skills or my character, but by the color of my skin. I paused, letting my words sink in. But today, I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about Mr. Hamilton, the man whose life was saved today because we were able to overcome this obstacle. I'm here to talk about every patient who could have been harmed if this kind of discrimination went unchallenged. Cameras clicked furiously, journalists hanging on every word. What happened today at the airport is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a larger problem in our society. But it's also an opportunity to learn, to change, to do better. I looked directly into the cameras, feeling the weight of the moment. From today on, I will work not only to save lives in the operating room, but also to combat prejudice and discrimination at every level of society. Because every life matters, regardless of the color of their skin. As the questions began to pour in, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it, because some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost.